I wrote a Spanish literature EE on the book Malinche by Laura Esquivel, which is about 200 pages, and it's originally written in Spanish. This is part of Group 2, which is a language acquisition EE, and my question is basically about how, well, I guess the literal question through translation would be through studying the novel Malinche and the concept of death and nature in the indigenous cosmovision. In what manner does Laura Esquivel subvert typical narratives about indigenous knowledge? And basically what I was talking about was how there's a lot of symbolism surrounding death and nature and the role in the life of Malinche, who is the main character of the book, and how this symbolism was used to present a different type of knowledge that we aren't always seeing in typical media. The methodology I used for this was primarily reading Malinche by Laura Esquivel. Because of literature essay, I focused on analyzing this, but I also used secondary sources about Malinche as a historical figure and in Mexican culture, and also several scholarly analyses of the systems of death and views surrounding death in order to support some of my theses about how the book by Esquivel actually subverts typical narratives that are presented in Western culture. My findings were primarily that, so I guess a little bit for context, Malinche is a figure in Mexican culture who represents like someone who betrays their own nation, and why that comes, or where that comes from, is that there's a woman named Malinali who was a translator for Cortez when he was occupying the New World, and she was originally sold as a slave and then was sold, or I guess gifted, to Cortez to be a translator. And in this, she actually had one of these children, and they were officially married for a short period of time, though not sure if like it was actually legally binding because he wasn't in Spain. That's not really important. But anyways, there's a lot of debate about whether or not she should be vilified because she functionally helped Cortez bring down several empires, or whether or not she should be understood as a woman who was, you know, a slave and forced to do things she didn't necessarily agree with. So basically, my findings were that Esquivel was able to reclaim like the actual woman of Malinali from her negative connotation of Malinche. She was able to share indigenous perspectives on nature and death, which I primarily classify as something called the eternal return, which is basically how life is cyclical rather than like a linear point that we understand in Western society, i.e., you know, you were born, you live life, and then you die, and that's it. And then I also said that this book explores different power dynamics between indigenous women of color who are female, and then colonization. Some of the problems I encountered in this project was that a lot of times I would read articles in English that were much easier, obviously, to understand, but I was unable to cite them or use any of the things I learned in my paper because they had to be originally in Spanish. It took a lot of time to read my sources, just because they were obviously not in my native language, so people who wrote other EEs didn't have this problem. And because I was dealing with indigenous cultures, and there's obviously like a very large swath of cultures and different beliefs, especially when we're talking about like indigenous groups in Mexico, because there are simply so many of them, I had to be really careful in the way in which I wrote sentences, so I wasn't over-essentializing, and I changed my research question like 18 times, so that was fun. And then it was in Spanish, so I also had to translate it 18 times. So in doing this, I've improved, one, my ability to write things in higher word counts. You know, get like essays from Darnell, there were 750 words, and I agonized over it for a week, and now I'm just like, oh, 750 words, I will write it tonight, because I've written 4,000 in different language, so it seems a lot easier. I look up less words when I'm reading because I simply don't have time for it, and I realized like I can usually understand sentences without looking up every word. I've learned a lot about formatting and how to do references and citations. I've learned about transition words in Spanish that you don't necessarily use when you're speaking, because you don't say like, however, furthermore, in addition to, like, and daily compensation. And I also learned how to scan academic articles better rather than reading the entire thing, because literally no one has time for that.
Yeah. Wow, that's
on my advice. Yeah. For advice, I would say don't necessarily just pick like the EE subject that like is the easiest for you. Like if I was just picking something that'd be easy to write for me, I write like a history EE because I know a lot about history and I can write things in English pretty quickly. But if you look at the rates at like which people get different marks in EEs, it's not necessarily the most advantageous to write something like that. You should write something that like perhaps there are less applicants, or perhaps people are more likely to score at a higher level, because the standards for writing something like insightful in a different language is far different from writing something insightful in your same language, because you get more points for like just writing competently. So it's not necessarily to say that like you should write a Spanish EE, but like don't just pick a subject because you think it's easy. You should look at like what picking that subject actually gets you. Don't procrastinate. Seriously, don't do it. College apps take more time than you would think.
Adults.
Like you should send your EE to your supervisor earlier than they say you need to, because it will take them longer to get it back to you than you would hope. Like the same ways in which they assign homework or like essays to be due like earlier than they actually need them to grade, like that works both ways. You should change your research question. If you don't, you're doing something wrong, because you will have a much different understanding of the topic from when you finish and when you start. If you're doing English, use Grammarly. I know it's like sort of expensive, but like it is absolutely worth it, and you can probably convince your parents to pay for it. Your supervisor shouldn't be making comments in your EE because you used the wrong like there, or to, or you don't know how to use commas. Your advice from them will be a lot more insightful if like your English is better, and then they can actually like dig into your idea rather than just like clarifying your sentences because they're bad. Like not to be harsh, but like people's writing sometimes can be unclear, and Grammarly will catch a lot of like the basic mistakes. And outlines are really important. Don't just start writing because you'll realize you get really top heavy because you'll think, oh, I need more words. Let me just write this like super long introduction. And then you realize a lot of it like should have been in a body of the paragraph, or you're just making assertions wildly because you have the idea and you're not sure where it should actually go in your essay. I think that's my last slide.
Awesome. Questions? Go ahead, Maddie.
So I'm kind of interested in writing a Spanish E. So do you have any advice specifically about like the Spanish part of it, or like did you get a lot of help from the senoras, or like outside of school, maybe like a Spanish literature expert or something that would help with that?
You can ask them a lot of questions about like just direct translations or grammar questions, but you'll have limited feedback on like writing the entire thing. So definitely like don't be afraid to just ask them like small, simple questions about how to translate sense. The other thing is that like even though your classmates aren't obviously going to have to speak Spanish, they'll catch a lot of just like basic errors, because as much as we like to think we all understand like the agreement between like L and law and like the rest of the words, you won't miss it when you're writing, especially when there's 4,000 words. Like you'll just be like zooming along and completely miss it, and Spanish teachers will spend so much time correcting basic errors that like your friends could easily catch. I felt really bad in hindsight when I looked at that. I was like, Jesus, I need to go back to year one. So I think that'd be my advice.
I will build on what Gabi said. There are few students who do EEs in math, physics, and world languages, and those score well because they're very challenging for kids to engage in, and therefore, they score well. Math, physics.
As the history teacher, I will add that in history it's impossible to get an A, or it's very difficult to get the highest marks on the history EEs. So Gabi is right.
Yeah.
I actually have one more question.
Yeah.
How did you pick your book, or how did you decide on that one?
So like Senora gave me a couple of book recommendations based on like what she knows I'm interested in. So like in debate, Tark and I read a lot of stuff about like settler colonialism and like gender identity, and I guess like maligned women in history, and kind of how that plays into like different media perceptions. And so Senora like recommended books to me that dealt with like the interaction of indigenous identity and colonialism. So if you ask them for book recommendations, they know you well enough that like they will give you a set of things that you will probably like.
Cool.
Also, highly recommend reading the summaries of the book in English first, and then picking it and reading it in Spanish.
Yeah.
And then Chase.
Chase, go ahead.
Chase.
Would you consider this more of a, I know it's Spanish, but would you consider it closer to history than English, like the way it's presented?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the big changes I made in my essay. So originally, when I got the topic, I was just like, oh, I want to talk about like the interaction between Malinali as an indigenous woman and Malinche as a figure called Mississippi. And then I realized like I would score really badly on my EE because it wasn't a literature analysis. So as I went along, I changed my question to be more related to how specifically S.P. Bell, the author of the book, use literary techniques to highlight the points I was trying to make. So it was actually a literature analysis, but I guess the conclusions I came to had to do more with like already generally accepted ideas of colonialism in scholarship. I don't know if that answers your question, but like you should be careful if you're writing a literature essay not to write a history one.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that did.
Yeah. Other questions, Patrick or Finley? For any of the students?
The free version of Grammarly is also good.
Free version of Grammarly is also good. All right. The other thing for you juniors to know is that the seniors will be around for a number of months. So as you engage in this EE process, you're welcome to connect in a way that's more authentic to you in a one-on-one conversation or at some point. I think the seniors feel hugely accomplished about writing 4,000 words like Gabby said, and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right, thanks guys. And